Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Tenney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. I'm grateful that we're holding this hearing today to examine President Biden's global tax surrender. Ways and Means Republicans have been sounding the alarm over the framework negotiated between President Biden's Treasury Department, Janet Yellen, and the OECD. This comprehensive rewrite of global tax rules championed by the administration would result in fewer U.S. tax revenues, reduce the global competitiveness of U.S. companies, and erode our overall economic strength. It amounts to nothing more than surrendering American tax sovereignty, with U.S. taxpayers sending a check to the tune of billions and billions of dollars to foreign countries. In fact, according to analysis from the Joint Committee on Taxation, the United States could stand to lose as much as $120 billion in tax revenue under the global minimum tax negotiated by the Biden administration. On top of that, OECD released recent guidance which substantiated the Republicans' concerns. President Biden's tax deal is unworkable and it's ill-conceived. This guidance does nothing to address my concerns, only serves to underscore the deal's fatal flaws, particularly on the under-taxed profits rule, which will send critical research and development abroad. Had Treasury consulted with Congress instead of completely neglecting the American people, perhaps they would have avoided these pitfalls. And I want to make sure I emphasize what the chairman had talked about earlier. Just accepting letters from the majority is not negotiating or working with us in terms of consulting. So I want to turn my questions to you, and thank you, sir, for your service and for being here. But Mr. Plowgian, the United States is the world's economic superpower, but we represent just 25% of the global GDP, 15% if adjusted for purchasing power. Multiple independent economic experts have found that the OECD deal would disproportionately impact the United States. My first question is, why would Treasury agree to a Pillar 1 framework where U.S. companies face 60% of the total burden of profit reallocation?
I'm sorry, Congresswoman, with respect to your question, are you, which pillar are you referring to?
Pillar 1.
Pillar 1. So a consistent priority across the administrations, the different administrations that have been involved in these negotiations, has been to protect U.S. interests, to protect U.S. businesses, and to protect U.S. workers. In particular, with respect to Pillar 1, one of the main purposes behind the negotiations, and this is based on input on a bipartisan basis from Congress, is to get rid of and prevent.
Okay, go ahead. Let me ask you, so do you think it's beneficial to the United States companies to pay more in taxes? I guess was that the decision that was made in implementing this?
Well, I don't think that Pillar 1 necessarily does that. So what?
Well, can I ask you, do you disagree with the Joint Committee on Taxation's assessment of the $120 billion tax revenue loss under the global minimum tax negotiated by Janet Yellen, Secretary Yellen?
So under Pillar 2, the JCT analysis actually shows multiple different scenarios. And again, with respect to the baseline that the JCT analysis uses, which is implementation of Pillar 2 by more than 40 of our largest trading partners, the midpoint of their range is an increase in U.S. tax revenue from other countries implementing Pillar 2. And indeed, in Scenario 5, which shows implementation by those same 40-plus jurisdictions, plus implementation by the U.S., they show...
So let me ask you, you didn't answer my question. Do you think that the Joint Committee on Taxation's numbers are wrong, regardless? So in your opinion, the U.S. companies will net a greater tax revenue and will not be penalized under the entire plan?
The JCT analysis shows that the U.S. gains revenue in multiple of those scenarios.
But they net gain revenue.
Yes.
And how do you come up with that conclusion?
Scenario 5 by the JCT shows an increase in U.S. tax revenues of $236.5 billion over the 10-year window.
And what's that analysis based on?
That analysis
is that an assumption that there's going to be greater trade, or we're not sure of that?
The assumptions that the JCT uses for Scenario 5 is adoption by the 40-plus jurisdictions and adoption by the U.S. of Pillar 2.
But don't you think that's a surrender of our sovereignty to give the right of other countries to tax our own entities? in a way that we're not even doing ourselves, and then to put this in an unfair trading position in the end?
Well, all countries have the sovereign right to tax their residents under their corporate tax
Right,
system.
but aren't we surrendering our right? We're subjecting our U.S.-based companies who are competing abroad to this unfair scheme.
The Pillar 2 rules are taxes imposed by jurisdictions on their own residents.
I understand. So, but overall, we're going to end up losing because we're penalizing our own U.S.-based companies when they try to compete in the foreign market. And I think my time has expired, so I'll have to talk to you about it further in another time. Thank you.